Speaker is Tim Nixon from Responsible Choice, and he's going to be talking about psilocybin mushrooms, eliminating the harms. And this presentation is going to cover how to identify gold tops and cubes, pans, bulimines. He's got photographs, and he's going to share the 4 golden rules which are necessary for ensuring the correct identification of these elusive fungi. And I know from being on Facebook, there's one Facebook page, and it's like people just throw up pictures of mushrooms all the time. It's like, what is it? Can I eat it? Will it kill me? Will it get high? So I think Tim's the man. He's an educator, a parent, and a drug law reform activist. He's given evidence to government committees, personal choice, community impacts inquiries about legalisation of cannabis, so he doesn't just focus on mushrooms. He's come all the way from the Sunshine Coast of South East Queensland, so welcome to our little village here. And he has got a book too on psilocybin mushrooms. Did you bring your book, Tim?
Plenty of books.
Plenty of books, yeah. So look out for the book after. It's about eliminating harm, published last year, and yeah. So no doubt he will talk about his book. So let's give a big Mardi Gras welcome to Tim.
Thanks everybody. Very happy to be here. Very thankful to all of the people who've organised this. So yeah, I've got a bit to talk about here. I'll try and make it pretty brief and try and have a bit of room for questions at the end, because I'm sure some people have them. But before we start, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge this country that we're on today. This is Bunjalung land. So just want to acknowledge the original inhabitants and custodians of this land, whose lands, winds and waters we now all share, and pay honour to their ancient enduring cultures. I'm from Gubbi Gubbi land, up in southeast Queensland, so if you're up there, we say Wanyanullum, welcome everybody. A little bit different down here, it's more Jingiwalla with the Bunjalung people. So look, as was mentioned in the introduction, I have been working with cannabis law reform for a while. But hopefully I can tie these 2 things together pretty easily. But I do have a website, it's called Responsible Choice, and it's primarily aimed at juxtaposing the harms of alcohol to those of cannabis, and just seeing where we lie with that. And that's kind of what led me down this road to leading me here to be talking to all you guys. So I'm just going to put this statement out there, and I'll come back to it in a little bit. But as far as my research has gone with alcohol compared to cannabis, not only is alcohol a lot more dangerous, it's the most dangerous drug that we have, and I'll talk to that later. If that causes a little bit of resistance for you, hopefully I can talk you around as we go on. But for me, in terms of my research and my website, cannabis, as a lot of people know here, is the responsible choice in terms of a recreational substance. And there's a whole plethora of issues that come along with alcohol consumption. Do what you want as long as you're not hurting anybody else, I say. So let's get into it. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history, and essentially I'm going to be paraphrasing my book for a large part of this talk. So I do talk very fast when I get excited, so I apologise for that. But before we start, just so I can get a little bit of an idea of who I'm talking to, and if you don't mind, audience, hands up if you've ever had a psychedelic experience, specifically with mushrooms. Nice, okay, thank you, that's great. Alright, so I'm not talking to the uneducated here. Anyway, okay. So just a quick whip through history. If you've used psilocybin mushrooms, more than likely at a relatively high dose, you've probably experienced some sort of iconography. It might have been Aztec, it might have been South American, you might have even had some Indian iconography in there. Now, I'm just going to speak to where that sort of comes from and how that ties in with a historical perspective. Obviously, psilocybin mushrooms have been around for a very long time. Mushrooms themselves have once ruled the earth before we were even here. And historically, there's been a lot of import placed on psychedelics, and mushrooms are no different. So the oldest evidence that we have of mushroom veneration comes from modern-day Algeria, which is in North Africa, from the Tassilian Nanjir Plateau. And there's a lot of cave systems through there. It's above the Sahara. The Sahara used to be grasslands, fertile grasslands, before we had our way with it, and used to flood very often. So the Tassili people have a lot of cave art, and one of the most significant artworks that they have there is what's called the Bee Shaman. It was most notably made popular by Kathleen Harrison, who is Terence McKenna's partner, in her sort of reimagining of it for his book Food of the Gods, which I highly recommend to everybody here if you haven't already read it. And so what is depicted in that cave art is a human form with mushrooms sprouting out of his skin while he clutches the mushrooms in his hand with big bee head. The actual cave art itself is kind of hard to decipher if you've ever had a look at the actual image, but Kathleen Harrison's sort of re-rendering is a lot more explicit and sort of really draws out those mushrooms in the picture. Very, very old. So I'm going to jump from Africa to South America, where it's probably the most recent sort of example of mushroom veneration with the Aztecs. So a lot of people, if you have a look for psilocybin mushrooms and iconography and all the rest of it online, you'll come across Xochipilli eventually. Now, Xochipilli was an Aztec god of, it depends on who you speak to, which anthropologist or historian you want to speak to, but essentially he was a god of fertility and agriculture. He's often referred to as the Prince of Flowers. I have a lovely photo in my book, which looks like this. Shameless plug. This one. That a friend of mine took in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. And it's a 16th century stone statue that's been carved, and it shows a figure on a dais in what's been described as mushroom trance. I'm not going to try and show you what that looks like. You're just going to have to imagine that, or buy my book. But he's sitting on a dais, a box that's covered in motifs, and a lot of them are sacred plants to the Aztec people. So amongst them, of course, it's speculated by prominent mycologists, most notably R. Gordon Wasson, if you've ever investigated mushroom history. Gordon Wasson was a prominent Wall Street banker, I think, who ended up going down to Mexico and being allowed to participate in a mushroom ceremony with a shamaness named Marina Sabina, and he sort of reported that back to Time magazine and was followed by a huge rush of people trying to get down there and have a taste of the mushroom magic there. But yes, certainly he speculated that Xochipilli, the Prince of Flowers, is actually a very important figure in Aztec mythology and culture, and that he is a prime example of just how important mushrooms were to those people. So I'm going to jump to the modern day now. There's many advocates for psilocybin use in the modern day. Over the last 50 years, it's been pretty much a bit of a renaissance, really. I'm going to start with a person who's very much a hero of mine. His name is Professor David Nutt. Now, he's a neuropsychopharmacologist working out of Imperial College in the UK, and he used to be the chair of the Committee for the Misuse of Drugs to the UK government, and the UK government asked Professor Nutt and his team of experts whether they should reschedule cannabis and make it more highly illicit. And Professor Nutt and his team came back and they said, no, you definitely shouldn't make it more illicit. And in fact, our research has shown that cannabis is less harmful than alcohol. And the UK government's response to that was, you're fired. Because you can't contradict the government line in this day and age. Hopefully, I'm talking to people that are already aware of this, but if you look at any cannabis information or psychedelic information that's put out by the government, it probably contradicts your personal experiences of that. So unfortunately, still in this day and age, we can't necessarily trust our official forms of information on these substances. A lot of it's left to what we call citizen science, and the more refined amongst the academic community that are actually really looking into the potential of these things. Certainly Professor Nutt's one of those people, and I'll come back to him a little bit later, but he's certainly someone in the modern day who is praising psychedelics for their benefit, not only to mental health, but to the betterment of the already well. So the next person on my list would be Michael Pollan, who's an author and a journalist. He had a really big book published recently, which was called How to Change Your Mind. I think that was published in 2019-20. Anyway, he's a big deal, Michael Pollan. If you don't know him, you probably, a quick Google search is going to show you who he is. University lecturer, journalist, well-known author through America, one of Time magazine's most influential people nowadays. And his book sort of covers his personal journey from being a self-confessed skeptic and materialist, coming across a lot of people who've had experience with psychedelics and really trying to plumb the depths of that, and really going back over the last sort of 50 to 70 years worth of research. And it's another thing that I'll pause now to point out. Our government likes to use the phrase more research needed. You'll hear it, especially with cannabis. More research needed. Oh, psychedelics, more research needed. We seem to, our politicians seem to want to sell us the picture that we're an isolated island and nothing that goes on in anywhere else in the world is of any relevance to us. No research being done on cannabis. It's got to be done here. I don't understand why, because unless you consider some of the most prominent academic institutions in the world as being, you know, sort of backyard woo-woo, I don't understand why we're not looking at this. The research has already been done. So, again, if you hear that more research needed phrase, I'm calling firm BS on that. Yeah, all you can take from that is these people are just stalling, or there's some sort of more than likely corporate interest that's behind that comment. But Michael Pollan's book has been very successful and has really served to bring a lot of the previous research to light around psychedelics, not only mushrooms, but certainly DMT more generally, ayahuasca, which probably people have heard a little bit about, and certainly MDMA and LSD. I'm going to move on to someone else now who's definitely firmly in that advocate category. He's a mycologist and an author and a speaker. His name's Paul Stamets, and he's a guy who walks around with actually a mushroom on his head, would you believe? Transylvanian Amadou mushroom is fireproof, and it's sort of like a leather. So in Transylvania and places where this mushroom's native, they use it for all sorts of things. Obviously, in the past, it was used to transport hot coals and whatnot from one camp to another, so that you had fire available, because it's very insulating. But he uses it as a hat because his brain has been set on fire by mushrooms. So, but he certainly published a book quite a number of years ago called Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. And not only that, he's actually identified and discovered numerous psilocybes in America as well. So he's actually named quite a number of them over there. But prolific presenter, researcher, he has numerous patents using mycological patents. Probably not least amongst them is a product where you make this fungus available to your bees, and then they use that fungus to kill off bacteria and infection in their hives. So he's patented things like that. That's what he's well into. And a big advocate for us emulating the mycelium and the mushroom in terms of how we live and how we interact with the natural world. The next person on my list of advocates is an African-American fellow who passed unfortunately last year. His name's Kalindi Iyi. And he was somewhat of a mycologist, a master mushroom cultivator, but also a martial artist. And certainly he's someone in the modern day, no doubt, if I say the name Terence McKenna, there'll be a lot of people in here who hopefully are nodding an eye. I know who that person is, perhaps not. But I'll certainly come to him in a moment. But in the past, it's been postulated that 5 dry grams of cubensis mushrooms is kind of the limit Often the term heroic dose is bandied around that amount or that dose, and that comes from Terence McKenna. And certainly in his conception of the mushroom world, that's about as much as you want to take and still keep your wits about you. Well, certainly Kalinda Yi had something to say about that, and he's been working in the US. He was from Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. He's been working with people in his community over there who are working with 20 to 40 gram doses. So certainly his perspective was that psilocybin is a technology that only works on the brain when you reach certain levels of saturation. So, and I'll come through, I'll talk to this a little bit later when we come back to it anyway, but there's something interesting definitely there. And certainly Kalinda Yi was a very firm believer that most, if not all, martial systems in the world came out of psychedelics. Explicitly mushrooms were implicated in a lot of them, but certainly his perspective after years of travelling the world and studying as many martial arts systems as he can. He was a master martial artist himself. He was convinced from his experiences and from anecdotally talking with all of these different cultures around the world that more than likely psychedelics were at the root of most martial arts systems used in the world today. Quickly, I'll go on to a few other people. Simon G. Powell's a psychologist and author from the UK. He's written a number of books and actually created a couple of documentaries on psilocybin mushrooms, and he petitioned the UK government with what's been known as the Powell Report now, when they were going to make psilocybin mushrooms illegal in the UK. They were illegal there for a long time, and you could go and buy them from what they call head shops there, until the market really started to blow up, and there was a lot of, I guess, unscrupulous dealings in that realm. And so the government just decided to can it. And so he submitted a report to the government on the back of all of his research that they should reconsider that. But unfortunately, as it often goes with government, it doesn't matter what the people want. It's what someone who's got the money or got the influence or got the ear wants. So that's the way it went over there. So it wasn't because there was great harm to the community, economic imperatives shining through there, I guess. But certainly his books, The Psilocybin Solution and Magic Mushroom Explorer, not a bad read. And the last two people I'm going to quickly touch over are Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary. If you haven't heard of these two people, you may not be old enough. I'm only just old enough, despite the greyness of my beard. Terence McKenna is probably one of the most famous psychonauts or explorers of the psychedelic realm in the last 50 to 70 years. And he was an academic and an author. And as I said before, his seminal book, Food of the Gods, coupled with another book he wrote, which is called The Archaic Revival, very influential for psychedelic thought, you know, from sort of the 80s up until now. And as I said previously, his writings and his perspective on doses and what the experience of the mushroom is were very influential in terms of the New Age movement coming out of the 70s and 80s and actually bringing sort of keeping psychedelics in the limelight where I think and he certainly believed they need to be. And the last person on the list is Timothy Leary. Unfortunately, my name is Timothy, by the way. My name's Timothy Nixon, so interesting there. If you know anything about the drug war and you know who Timothy Leary is and you know who Richard Nixon is, I find myself in a strange place here. Regardless, Timothy Leary was a psychologist, a Harvard psychologist, and he too ended up heading down, and I'm sort of cutting this story short, please look into this if you find any of it interesting, journeyed down to Mexico with a friend and did a significant dose of mushrooms, and said he got more out of that experience than 10 years of psychotherapy as a psychologist. So he went back to Harvard and shared psilocybin after it was synthesized by Albert Hofmann, who also synthesized LSD. Went back and shared it with his friends, but pretty soon LSD came onto the scene and completely dominated his attention from then on. But he's certainly authored a few books. Is probably somewhat unfairly credited with bringing the whole of the establishment down on psychedelics during the 70s. because he's very outspoken, and certainly his whole faculty in Harvard all got the sack because of questions around the ethics of some of the experiments they were doing with patients with psychedelics. And certainly, I'll take questions at the end. I'm sorry. Don't stop me in my flow, sister. But certainly, the most prominent experiment amongst the ones that they conducted was called the Good Friday experiment, which was conducted under a church on Good Friday in the basement underneath. So they had the mass being played down to the seminary students who they dosed with placebo and with psilocybin. And even though Rick Doblin, who is the head of MAPS, Multidisciplinary blah blah blah, I looked that acronym up, it's Psychedelic Studies Centre, who recently went over, in the last couple of years, went over Leary's study and found some holes in it and sort of said, oh, well, we don't know if we can really count these conclusions as accurate. The seminary students who had the active dose, years later, many of them went on to become priests and all the rest of it, came back years after and said that was the single most important event of their life, or one of the most significant, or what they call a mystical experience, where they actually saw Jesus and they saw God and they spoke to him and he confirmed their life path or not. Very common experiences, and again, psilocybin works very much individually, so the experience you have will be tailored to you because you're generating it. The psilocybin mushroom's just facilitating it. It comes from you. So we're moving on. A little bit of a chat about science here. And certainly, I'm only going to rush through it, but if this is something that interests you, the name's Professor David Nutt, Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, and Dr. Roland Griffiths are three names that should reveal a wealth of information and research on psilocybin in the modern day. But just to kind of go over just quickly what they've been talking about and what the modern research shows, psilocybin is recognised to be virtually identical to serotonin by the body. It works on what's called the 5-HT2A receptors. So your body actively uptakes psilocybin when you take it. Unlike alcohol, which it actively fights and will start to process as soon as it gets into your system, your body craves, well, I'm not going to say craves, probably the wrong word. It welcomes psilocybin. It welcomes DMT, which psilocybin actually is. And as it was mentioned in the last talk about cannabis, similarly, the lethal dose 50, or the LD50, which is a scientific ranking to signify how toxic a substance is, and the way that's extrapolated is you get 100 mice, you dose them all with a particular substance, and when 50 of them die, that's your LD50 dose. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the LD50 of psilocybin is very low. So to possibly end up in some sort of compromised health situation from dosing on it, you have to eat your body weight in dried mushrooms. So that's a lot. And certainly when I talked earlier about Kalindi EU and dosing 20 to 40 grams, that's a lot. To get 20 to 40 grams down of dried mushrooms, actually eating them, you'll be lucky if you can hold them down. You're probably going to throw that up. It's really difficult. So really safe, really high safety profile for psilocybin. And as I said, it's one of the most potent psychedelics in the world. Now, I'm not here to argue about what's more potent. Suffice to say, psilocybin is actually 4-NN-dimethyltryptamine. It's DMT, if people know what DMT is. And if you don't know, I'm going to tell you. So dimethyltryptamine is actually, and some people might get dirty with me here saying it, I'm going to say it anyway. It's endogenous to the human body. We actually produce it. Dimethyltryptamine's in a lot of grasses, in a lot of trees. It's in acacias. Don't get me started on that. So it's also considered to be one of the most potent psychedelics on the planet. Certainly there's variations of DMT. 4-NN-dimethyltryptamine is what psilocybin is. It's part of the reason that it's orally active, in that you can just pick it up and eat it, is because recent research has revealed that psilocybin mushrooms contain what are known as beta-carbolines. Now, DMT is normally metabolized by the body when you take it, because instinctively the body knows it's going to change your consciousness. And if there's lions and tigers around, you don't want to take a big dose of DMT because you can't run and you can't fight because your normal default mode network consciousness has been interrupted. So it processes it pretty quick. But the thing about DMT, the various, it's like a spectrum. And certainly over on the far end of the spectrum, we've got what's known as 5-MeO-DMT. It can be found, it's usually synthesized, but it can be found in situ, if you want, in nature, in what's known as the Sonoran Desert toad. Anyone heard of this? Is anyone? Yeah? Good? All right. So the Sonoran Desert toad is a relative of the cane toad, actually. It's called Bufo alvaris, the botanical name for it. It has big sacs on its back, like cane toads. And if you pop those and you get the venom out and then you dry it out, it crystallizes into 5-MeO-DMT, which is then smoked. And that experience is what we call the white light. So yeah, you're going somewhere, it's not here, and when you come back you're going to be different. But that's on the right, far end of the spectrum, okay? And I guess mushrooms are somewhere in the middle to the other end, in my experience. Some people might say that's completely off, but it's open to discussion. Regardless, incredibly potent psychedelics, and certainly the word psychedelic, which is my preferred word when we're talking about this, comes from the Greek words psyche and doulon. Psyche meaning mind, and doulon meaning sort of to manifest or to bring out. So psychedelic, the term means mind manifesting, which goes back to what I was talking about before. When you take it, there's a lot of people who will dispute, oh, it's this, and you're seeing spiritual worlds and blah, 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 blah. I'm not disputing any of that. But what you're seeing is your mind. So the bad trip side of things, what you're seeing is your mind. So the indication there, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, is you better clean up your room, as Jordan Peterson says. Clean your room up. Yeah, before you invite psilocybin in. Otherwise, it'll tell you to clean your room up, and you'll be like, dude, this is so dirty in here. Look at all this stuff. It's crazy. Didn't realise it was here. Yeah. Once that's cleaned out, the experience will be different, likely. So when you take psilocybin, like a lot of psychedelics, certainly LSD is very similar, it changes the circulation of blood flow in your brain. So a quick little bit of neuroscience here. Most of us now, because we're dealing with space and time, you and me, we're working out of what's called the default mode network, which is primarily time and space and all the rest of it. We need that to survive. I can't cross the road in another state of consciousness safely because I'm not actually super aware of what's going on around me. Don't get me wrong, psilocybin at a low dose, and I'll talk to that later, can certainly increase your visual acuity, so you actually see better when you're on it, but we'll get to that. So essentially what's happening is default mode network, time and space, here and now. When you meditate or you take psilocybin or any other psychedelic, it forces the circulation in your brain into another, what they call another network. And this is called your task positive network. And this is where, if I'm a Theravadan monk and I've been meditating for 10,000 hours through my life, give me a couple of minutes sitting down and I'll turn that part of my brain on. Okay, I've been trained to do it. I don't need anything to do it. That's why, you know, people in the 70s were going over and giving these gurus and yogis LSD, and they were just like, more, yum, yum, more, yum, yum, more, yum, yum. What's it do? Yum, 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 yum. Is it going to start working? Because they can access that mind state. But for us lower level mortals, we need some sort of technology, and certainly psilocybin is one of them. So when you push into your task positive network, I guess the motifs are not so much time and space here and now, it's more there is only now and everything is one. So if there is only now and everything is one and I'm feeling totally connected, I don't want to be faced with ferocious animals or cars or anything like that, because it doesn't matter. My consciousness is in a far different place, and I'm not necessarily equipped to deal with the day-to-day hazards of human life. But certainly every dose of psilocybin, and I would argue most psychedelics, is going to permanently change your personality. Now, the extent of that change is only going to be known to you or the people around you, but I guarantee you it'll change you. And depending on the dose, the magnitude of change is going to be relative to the dose. But there's been a lot of interest in mushrooms and psychedelics in particular, probably ayahuasca's got a lot of airtime for this, because it actually has a big implication for addiction. So with, if I can use this picture and you can come along with me, I've heard it spoken about before, and I think it's a nice way to explain this. So if you can think about your brain as a snowfield, and you're on the top of the slope, and you're looking down, it's fresh powder snow. And you go, okay, it looks nice, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go this way, and I'm going to take a few turns around that post, and I'm going to snake down and I get to the bottom of the hill. When you get back to the top of the hill, for your next thought, that track's already there. So it's easy to ski down that track. I might just go down that way. Oh, no, this was really fun. I'm going to go down that way again because it's known. After a while of using that track, in my mind, it gets deeper and deeper and more habitual for me. So I'll just constantly go to the track because that gets me where I want to go. And it's really deep and clear and I know the path, so I'll stay down it. So what psilocybin and psychedelics do is they dump a whole load of powder snow on your slope. So the usual pathway that you used to go down is not there anymore. It's not visible and you don't feel the compulsion to go down there. So if I can consciously come back to the top of my slope and it's been repowdered, and that's an addictive pathway that's caused me a lot of trouble, I'm not going down there anymore. I'm going that way, or that way, or that way, or any way I want. So it has massive ramifications for addiction, and for us analysing the causes of our addiction. I'm not going to stand here and say that we don't need things that alleviate our pain and help us move away from potential substances that we're not working with well. But the psychedelic experience, when it's done for a healing purpose, is not a free ride. You're not going to be given something you take and go, wow, I feel better. You're going to come out of that experience going, whew, that was hard work. I'm wrung out. I've cried. It's all cried out. Okay, I've done some hard yards here. It's not free. So a lot of people, I think, are under the illusion that I pop that pill and I wake up the next day and I'm good, like an Aspro or something like that. No. It's going to show you your mind and why you're sick and how you might be well. It's not a guarantee, but certainly what's known as the mystical experience, which is generally more encountered on more higher doses of psilocybin, has the effect of really changing people's lives and reassessment of what I do, reassessment of what my life's about, reassessment of my conception of reality. So it's big stuff, and as I said, it has ramifications for your personality and for the rest of your life. It's no joke. But certainly research, modern research that's been done over the last couple of years actually liken the psilocybin experience to what it's like to be a child. It puts you back into that childlike state of wonder, which we're all in when we're young, but then we grow up and we're like, oh, you can't do that, you can't be like that, I can't act like that, I can't speak that way anymore. And then if you've ever seen anyone who's tripping, that doesn't apply anymore, okay? At a higher level, that's all out the window. I'm back to that blank slate, childhood wonder. Anything's possible, it's all open. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about relative drug harms now, and this is kind of tying in what I said earlier about how I was researching the harms of alcohol compared to those of cannabis, and I came across Professor David Nutt's work. Now, he whipped up with a crew of experts, and he is the expert of experts, by the way, he's the man in terms of modern day drug research and neuropsychopharmacology. And they came up with what's called the multi-criterion decision analysis, which looks at drug harms not only to the user but also to the people around the user. And their expert team gave 50 points. They gave each substance a raw score out of 100. 50 points was on the damage to the user or the harm to the user, and 50 points was to the harm to those people around the user while they're in under the influence. Does anyone want to guess what the most dangerous drug was? Hands up, please. Come on. Straight up. Now, alcohol got a score of 72 out of 100. Okay? Does anyone want to guess what psilocybin mushrooms got? A guess?
0.
It's not 0. And this is where my book comes in.
12.
It was 6. 6 out of 100. Now, I've got a number of graphs, and all this information's in my book, of course, but certainly a simplified graph. The harm to others for alcohol far exceeds the harm to the user. So what we're talking about here is domestic violence, drink driving, random assault, sexual assault, etc., etc. You know the deal. You're in Australia. We like our grog here. But we don't like to look at the damage it does to us and to our communities. We don't like to look at that very much at all. And this is why David Nutt's face is quite prominent in the UK. He's the guy you call if you've got any kind of drug-related thing on the news, because it's very controversial. He owns a wine bar, by the way, but he did this research. So, coming back to, you've got alcohol on one end, 72 out of 100, psilocybin mushroom, 6 on the other end. Cannabis, by the way, sits around about in the middle. It gets 20 out of 100. And we're talking about 8 the harm to others and probably about 10 to the user. Now again, the factors that they look at in this are economic, and certainly with cannabis, they're talking about smoking and tobacco involved and all the rest of it. So there's room to move there in interpretation of those results. But certainly more curious for me was, why are psilocybin mushrooms getting a 6 and they're illegal? And what's the 6 for? So they had 2 categories that they gave the mushrooms a rank for, and that was drug-specific impairment and drug-related impairment. So they get you high. So be careful. But seriously, be careful. So I'm here to talk about harm reduction. Part of the reason that there was danger to the user there for psilocybin mushrooms is because if you pick the wrong one, you're in trouble. That's real, okay? So that's, again, part of my book is to ensure that one of the most harmful, least harmful substances on the planet is completely harmless. In terms of, and when I'm talking about harm, I'm talking about, are you going to die or not? If I take it, will I die? If you say, oh, at this dose, that means yes. If you say no, that means no. This is one of the most important questions that we seem to find difficult to answer and ask in our society. Will this drug kill me? If I'm in the pharmacy, most of the answers is yes. If I take it wrong with this thing too much, I'm dead. Alcohol, yes. If you put a pound of hash in a room and a bottle of vodka and a 5-year-old, straight up, which one's going to kill them? We don't want to talk about that. Nah. I'm not saying don't drink, I'm just saying let's be real. Let's think about what we're doing. Especially for the children. Anyway, getting back to mushrooms, harm reduction. What is harm reduction and why would we like to participate in it? Well, harm reduction is based on the idea that I'm not your parents. You do what you want. You're adults. Different to the government, hey? You're adults, you're going to do what you want. So our job is to make you be able to access the information that allows you to do that in the safest way possible. It doesn't matter what it is that you want to do, regardless of what people want to morally judge it as or whether we think it's good or bad or the other. It doesn't matter. It's your body, you'll do what you want. So if that's the case, and it is, then we want to try and put out information that allows people to do what they want to do in the least harmful way. So, specifically with psilocybin mushrooms, they can be very, 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 very challenging on many, many levels. So, if it's something that you found yourself looking at or considering, think back to what I said before about no free rides and hard work. And I'll talk about doses when we're getting to it in a second, but certainly, if you're dealing with significant trauma or there's issues that you think that psilocybin mushrooms might be able to help you with, yeah, it's not free. So we're talking about, in the past, psychedelics were considered to be what they call psychomimetic. And that was why they were studied intensely by psychology, because the psychologists believed if you give psilocybin mushrooms to people, it makes them temporarily psychotic. So you can kind of study that and see what works and see how you bring them out and all the rest of it. So it's sort of like making someone temporarily insane, they thought. So it's really handy for them to study. But soon the research revealed a whole lot of other different things. But certainly when we're dealing with mind-altering substances of the magnitude of psilocybin and 5-MeO-DMT and ayahuasca, of course, which is DMT, we want to be really clear on what's going to happen potentially for us. And when I say that, I'm talking about life changes. Okay, I'm talking about changes to your relationships, what you consider important, your work, you know, your perception of and conception of reality. Is it what you thought it was? Now it might not be. Okay, these are significant questions and things that people will have to grapple with after taking significant amounts. Lower amounts, not so much, but certainly with trauma and all the rest of it, you're probably looking at more significant doses, and with that comes challenges. So, in terms of harm reduction, dosing in dried grams is essential for safe use. I don't know how many times people have come to me and said, "Dude, I took mushrooms," and I'm like, "How much did you take?" "I don't know." No, don't do that, please. For your sake and for the sake of the people around you, please dose in dried grams. If you can, tell someone that's around you how much you took, just so that they can have a bit of a gauge as to where you're at, and if anyone has to get involved because things go a bit sideways, they know, and it's all as safe as possible. The next thing that is probably the most important thing is set and setting. And by that I mean your mindset and where you take it. Okay? I would not advise that Mardi Gras, no matter how much of a good time you're having, is a good place to take psilocybin mushrooms at a significant dose. Okay? So I'll qualify that in a moment. But at your house, with your loved ones, where you are familiar, that is a good place. Okay? Yes, and I'll continue. Hopefully I'll cover a few more things as we go on. In terms of harm reduction, I'm talking about psilocybe cubensis mushrooms. I don't apologise for the way I say that. I am a primary school educator. That is how you say it in Australia. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. You'll hear it said many different ways. I'm talking about psilocybe cubensis mushrooms, which are native to a lot of countries in the world. They're very prolific. And also the Panaeolus cyanescens mushrooms, which are they're still found through Micronesia and French Polynesia and all the rest of it, and in Australia, but they're not so widespread. The cubensis mushroom is pretty much the archetypal magic mushroom. Gold tops, goldies, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, they're pretty common. And so when I'm talking about these doses and harm reduction, I'm talking in doses of cubensis mushrooms, which is kind of like a benchmark in terms of potency. Panaeolus cyanescens, or blue meanies, are some of the most potent mushrooms in the world, and they are very, very different. So your blue meanies are about 2 to 2.5 times as potent as your cubensis mushrooms. Very deceptive. Cubensis mushrooms, I have photos in my book. You can find them this big. Massive. Big. So you might think, oh, I'm taking one of those. I'm taking a big one. I can take a lot of these little ones. No. No, no, no. Don't do that. The pancyans or the blue meanies are way, way more potent, and I'll come to that in a little bit when we're talking about those. So I'm talking about cubensis mushrooms generally in terms of dosing. If you're thinking about blue meanies, you have to factor in that they're 2 to 2.5 times more potent. So in terms of the tripping on mushrooms, I would sort of categorise it into sort of 4 stages or 4 doses, roughly. So you're looking at your microdose. This is where a lot of interest is at the moment in microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. Generally speaking, most people would do that with a form of cubensis mushroom. There's lots of different names and they do come with different strains. They're essentially cubensis mushrooms. So the microdose is somewhere between 0.1 of a gram and 0.5, I would say. Some people would say under 1 gram. I would disagree with that because we're all very different. Some people might take, half a gram of mushrooms and be fully tripping off it. So especially women, you need to be aware that you're far more sensitive, just like with alcohol and most substances. So just factor that in. But yeah, your microdose is around 0.1 to 0.5 of a gram, and this is in terms of cubensis mushrooms. And this is, a lot of people use that for migraine and headache alleviation, cluster headaches and all the rest of it. Please look into that if that sounds interesting to you. But a lot of people use it for anxiety and other things. I'm not going to go too far into there. Then you've got what you call a nature appreciation dose, what I call, and that would be from about half a gram to maybe 3 grams of cubensis mushrooms. And that's going to mean you can walk around, you can function generally. Everybody's different. This is only very general. You can talk. There might be some breathing walls. Colours are going to be very vivid. You're going to feel very open in your heart, but probably starting to feel a little bit confused and maybe overwhelmed at times. It's very, if you've used mushrooms before, as a lot of people in here have, you'll know that it comes in waves. So the intensity of those waves, you might have to sit that out a little bit, but you should be okay on that sort of dose. Then you've got your mid-range dose, which I would classify as about 3 to 6 grams. Now, a lot of people are going to balk at that, especially 6 grams because it's over the elusive heroic 5. But regardless, that's what I would call a mid-range dose. I would highly recommend that you're in a safe place, set and setting with someone that you love and trust. And this brings us to the importance of trip sitting. If you've never tripped before on anything, really good idea to have someone with you who you love and trust, or you know very well, who's going to be able to look after you and sort of help manage you if things get a little bit tricky. Because they can, as I've said, it's definitely can be super challenging. And then beyond your mid doses, what I call your macro dose, which is 6 grams or more. Okay? I would not recommend anybody decide to go out from this talk and take 6 grams or more, even of cubensis, let alone Paneola cyanescens. Please leave those ones alone at that dose, because your macro dose is really going to possibly involve what they call ego death, and I'll get to that. Certainly a possibility at those doses, but you're going to be very disorientated. You're probably going to be suffering from ataxia, which means your motor function is going to be heavily impaired. So moving around is not the best idea, and you might need someone there just to tend to you if you want a drink or a little bit of comfort or something like that. So I've kind of covered typical effects, and I've talked about trip sitting. Typical effects: changes in colour, synesthesia, where you can feel colours and hear colours. It's sort of the effects on the brain are quite astounding, and I don't really have time to go into that too much. But ego death, I'll just speak to that. It's kind of really leaving your sense of person behind and leaving your body. A lot of people talk about out-of-body experiences. And upon re-entry into said body, it's very hard sometimes for a lot of people to reintegrate and remember who they are. Okay, so it's no joke. It will literally snow, heavy snow, the higher the dose, the heavier the snow, if I can put it that way, referring back to my snowy slope analogy. I'm going to move to the law now, because we're moving along. I'm from Queensland. The Drugs Misuse Act of 1986 and the Drugs Misuse Regulation Act of 1987 is what I'm talking about. Psilocybin and psilocin are Schedule 2 dangerous drugs. 0.1 of a gram can equal a $590,000 fine. Or 25 years in the can. Queensland doing it big. It's classed the same as 2 grams of speed, cocaine or heroin, or 20 grams of opium, or 100 cannabis plants. Trespass laws may be considered in sentencing as well, so please consider that. Does anybody know what a sentence or a fine looks like for assault? Anybody got any ideas? What am I looking at? Jail term, fine?
3 months good behaviour.
Yeah, 3 months good behaviour.
6 months for burning someone in the head.
Straight up, 25 years for 0.1 of a gram. Interesting. Very quickly. When will you find them and where? Temperatures over 22 degrees in southeast Queensland. Our wet season goes from November through to around about now. So temps are getting a little bit low now. I'm talking about soil temps. But ambient temperatures are somewhat indicative of soil temperatures. So wet season, mushrooms are pretty much 90% water. So you need a lot of water before they come out. But you need the heat because they need humidity. So about 200 mils of rain in about 24 to 48 hours is enough to raise that water table up, saturate the mycelium so they can draw that water up and fruit. Okay? It's elevation dependent. So obviously if you're very high up in the mountains, you're going to need a lot more water because the water table's a lot further down. Whereas if you're down low near water courses, you're not going to need as much rain. But you need that squelch, 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 squelch. That's what you're after. And quite warm. 100% humidity is ideal. You want ruminant cattle because both of these mushrooms that I'm talking about are coprophilic, which means they grow out of poo. They love poo. So cows, horses, goats, alpacas, anything that ruminates, really good. You'll find them growing out of there. Usually you'll find the Panaeolus cyanescens will flush first because I believe they've got a lower water requirement because there's so much less hefty. But usually they'll flush first and then the cubes will follow on in the weeks after that. Pastures are what we're looking for in the hinterland generally. Lovely and green and lush, not too long. I wouldn't be looking in any grass higher than my knees. Shade trees are important for cattle, and what we're looking at are cattle here because the cow does the poo, the mushroom goes out of the poo. So follow the cows, you'll find the mushrooms. They love camphor laurels though. Camphor laurel is really good microclimate for the mushrooms to sprout up. Cows like to take shelter from the sun under there and they'll do a lot of poo, so it's really good. Dodge Roundup. If you see any Roundup around, it kills all the mycelium. Don't pick any mushrooms where people have been applying Roundup. Bad idea. So the identification, 4 rules, and this might be pretty much all I get to, and maybe a couple of quick questions. First rule of picking psilocybin mushrooms in southeast Queensland, it does extend down here into northern New South Wales. You will have both of these mushrooms here. Rule number 1, no poo, no can do. What was it? Straight up. So important, if it doesn't grow out of poo, don't pick it. Because there might be a question mark. If you're not sure, don't pick it. First question, mushroom, poo, good. Rule number 1, good. Second rule, no gill, just chill. What was it? No gill, just chill. Good. Psilocybin mushrooms are what we call agaric mushrooms. So they've got the gills underneath. Okay? If you find any other mushrooms and you turn them over and they're spongy, they're our bolete mushrooms. No good. No gill. Okay? So if it's got no gills, don't pick it. If it's got gills, pick it. You're on the right track. Rule number 4. If it ain't blue, it ain't true. Sorry, rule number 3. Thank you, sister. If it ain't blue, it ain't true. If it ain't blue, it ain't true. True. So psilocybin and psilocin react to oxygen. So when you break the stem, wait and watch, and it will turn blue. The cubes, in my experience, the cubensis gold top mushrooms, will be more like a greeny blue or like an aquamarine. Panaeolus cyanescens stain an ink dark blue. Okay, they're very dark, but they may take a while to stain. So pick them, leave them, come back and have a look at them later. Pancyans, depends on where you pick them from, environmental conditions. Sometimes they blue really quick, sometimes they'll take quite a while, maybe 5 minutes or more. Check that out. Rule number 4, it's the last one. Take a print to get a hint. Straight up. So we're talking about spore prints. If you get a mushroom, you snap the stem off, you put it gill down on a piece of paper. Put a glass on top of it. So you've trapped the mushroom in there. Leave it overnight, take the jar off, take the mushroom up and you'll have a big spore print. Kind of looks like that. Yeah? Spore print. Yeah.
And is it blue?
No, it's not blue. So the spore print, there is a colour indication though. So for both of these mushrooms, for the cubensis mushrooms, you should have a dark purple spore print. Really, really dark, almost black, but it's got this purple tinge. And when you pick them, you'll often find they've got a purple tinge. If anyone, not that anyone will pick mushrooms in here, I'm not advocating that. Yeah, they're purpley, dark purple, those cubensis spore prints. The Panaeolus cyanescens are jet black, okay? So you want either a black spore print or a dark purple spore print to make sure that they fill all those criteria. Now, regardless of that, if you're picking mushrooms or thinking about it, I would take a photo of the one you're going to pick before you pick it. Take a photo in situ, in the poo, in the ground. Don't pick it and go, I found these. Because my first question would be, where? What was it growing out of? Remember rule number 1, no poo, no can do. If it's not in poo, it's harder to identify. So you take a photo where you find it, then you pick it. Then you send your photos, or you upload them to the Shaman Australis Botanical Forum in Australia, or the Shroomery, which is a US-based one. Make an account, stick it up there and say, I found these, what are they? And within a day, someone will say, they're blah blah. Or I think there are a lot of botanists and a lot of mycologists on these forums, they will identify them very quickly for you. Okay, so if you're not confident, really be careful, because even though with the Panaeolus cyanescens mushrooms, there's a lot of Panaeolus species in Queensland and New South Wales, I don't believe any of them are fatally poisonous, but certainly if you pick the wrong one, your tummy's going to know about it, okay? With the cubensis, there might be a couple of dodgy doppelgangers there too. Very quickly, cubensis mushrooms, gold on the top, pretty hefty, white stem. All of this information is in my book. This one, lots of colour photos. But the thing about the cubensis mushroom, gold on the top, nice, thick, hefty stem. It'll sort of break into a fibrous mass when you pick it. It's got a veil remnant from when the mushroom was attached to the stem and it popped open like an umbrella. Where it was attached is a little membrane that we call the veil. It's sort of purple. So when you pick cubensis mushroom, poo, that's good. I have a look, it's gold. I pick it, it's got the veil. It's got gills on it as well, okay? It stains blue. I take a photo, take a print. Wait for the blue. Play it safe. It's sort of that benchmark potency. Various presentations that I've included in my book. If it's wet, if it's dry, if it's exposed, if it's not. Cubensis mushrooms can look very different. So there's quite a lot of photos in my book just to try and counter that. I've got a lot of photos here, I'm not going to show you that. The Panaeolus cyanescens, however, are very spindly and small. They're much smaller than cubensis. So say your average cubensis is so high and so round cap. Pancyans are about this big, generally. I have found bigger ones. The average cap size is probably a 10-cent piece. I have found bigger ones, but that's on average. They're kind of white, pale, and they've got a grey cap with a touch of gold on the top. Okay? Very thin stem. They're sort of bullet-shaped or dome or bell-shaped. The cap, again, there's variations. They're up there in my book, the variations you might find. They're dark blue staining, one of the most potent in the world. Okay, great. So, yeah, I've kind of blabbed on a lot here, but you guys have been a great audience, really listening well. The war on drugs is a ridiculous expensive failure, everybody. If you don't know that, look into it. It doesn't take that much to figure that out. It fosters crime. There's a lot of stuff that we can help ourselves with. Certainly psilocybin is one of them. I urge you to be very safe. This is something that you choose to embark on. There are benefits there to be had. There's no doubt. The research, of which there is a significant amount, supports that. Certainly for mental illness, PTSD, chronic depression, OCD, multiple systems atrophy, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. I'm chucking some words in there that a lot of research hasn't covered yet, but I'm saying that it does anyway. There's a lot of citizen science being done out there, people. Just because we have a lot of experts like Professor Nutt, who I've got a lot of respect for, gave me a shout line on my book, by the way. I wrote a book, by the way. you know, these people are doing big stuff for us in our movement, but we don't want to give our agency away. I don't need a corporation to sell me mushrooms, or cannabis for that matter. We can find these things ourselves. They grow in the earth. Nature has given them to us. We just need education, and we just need harm reduction so we can do what we naturally do as safely as we possibly can. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tim. I said thanks for coming all the way from Queensland to share with us that amazing story, and I'm sure many people will be interested to have a look at your book. And is that available in the Hemp Embassy?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. So Perceptio, Happy High Herbs, and the Hemp Embassy sells my book. I've got a truckload, and my website is responsiblechoice.com.au.
So you can find Tim, he'll be lurking around. Can I just see, is Eve here? Oh great, Eve is here. Eve is our next speaker. Well, I said thank you once again, and a big Mardi Gras round of applause for Tim. And our next speaker, don't go away, we're having another book launch.
It's expensive.
Australia Cannabis Cookbook. And we would like to welcome Eve Sinton, who has come to us all the way from Murrumbidgee. Well, welcome Eve. I'm so glad you could join us today.